Hello there. Today, instead of just giving an opinion, I'm going to share a bit of a personal story about how my opinion of the Mass Effect franchise went from adoration to disgust, and then, after years of errantry, back to adoration. I quickly fell in love with the first two Mass Effect games, and played through them countless times between 2008 and 2012. They had plenty of rough edges, sure. I often found myself going, "Really? That's what I have to say here?" Or scratching my head over the plot's leaps of logic, to paraphrase Admiral Hackett. But these were always fleeting annoyances. I'd forget about them as soon as we moved on to the next scene. And importantly, I always remembered the good parts long after I'd stopped playing. So, while the plot and dialogue were somewhat uneven, the setting and characters were so vivid that I always wanted more. I wanted to explore this immersive galaxy and its detailed cultures with intertwined and conflicting goals and histories. It was the best aspects of Babylon 5 mixed with the expansiveness of Star Wars. I thought I'd be in love with Mass Effect for the rest of my life. Unfortunately, when the third game came out, it changed things. There's been a lot written about the ending to Mass Effect 3, and I'll try not to retread any of that too much. Watch mrbtongue's video on it if you aren't familiar with the more cogent criticisms of the original ending. In brief, I did not care for the endings. Not because Shepard died. There are plenty of stories where the hero dies at the end. But because it broke the mystique of Mass Effect. I couldn't enjoy the series the same way anymore. All the rough edges that I had always been able to ignore suddenly stood out as they never had before. In some way, maybe they subconsciously made me think of the contrivances of the ending. Whatever the case, the spell was broken. I could no longer enjoy the setting as I had. I replayed the first two games a couple of times after 2012, but never with the same enthusiasm, and I never bothered to reinstall the third one, except for one brief stint to play the multiplayer with my wife. But I never felt the desire to touch the single-player campaign again, not even to try the extended cut or the DLCs. I mean, why bother? They weren't going to fix the nonsense that was the ending. They weren't going to unruin the setting. Now, ruin might sound like a strong word. After all, there's a lot of people who think that while the ending maybe was somewhat weak, the setting itself is still strong. If you're one of those people, great, but unfortunately, I was not. For me, I was pretty much done with the series. A few weeks ago, however, I was perusing Nexus mods, and for whatever reason, ended up looking at the Mass Effect page, where I saw the Starchild Be Gone mod, which led me to discover Adamis's Happy Ending mod. Now, I've never been one of those people who felt that the series needed a happy ending. My favorite Dragon Age Origins playthrough was the one where my warden died at the end, which has stayed with me because it felt fitting and made sense as a natural conclusion to the choices I had made along the way and the themes I'd established for my character. Now, I know there are a lot of people who like the Mass Effect 3 ending, or at least feel it's not that bad. But again, I am not one of those people. For me, the ending felt like a contrived, poorly thought out mess that not only ignored key themes and character development leading up to it, but actually tried to invalidate them. And these mods promised to completely get rid of the Godchild scene and the ridiculous ending options offered therein. This was exactly what I wanted to change about the third game. Well, there are a lot of other things I would also like to change, but these were the two must-haves. So, I installed them along with some other interesting sounding mods, and began my first new playthrough of the entire series since 2012. I was still a bit checked out when it came to Mass Effect, so I didn't play in the most thorough manner possible. I definitely skipped over some things. However, when I did get to the end of the third game, after a fairly quick 80-hour run through the trilogy, I got the bad ending, because I'd forgotten that the mod fac that I'd read a few weeks prior had said that you needed an EMS score of at least 5,200 to get the happy ending. Turns out my EMS score was 5,167. I hadn't put too much effort into my EMS since I remembered the mod page saying it should be easy to get the requisite EMS unless you really mess things up. Now, it's true that I hadn't stopped the Quarians from killing themselves when their genocidal ambitions were thwarted, Much as I like Tali, I do not like the Rannoch chapter and was trying to get it over with as quickly as possible. So I skipped the mission where you go into the Geth consensus or whatever it was. I'm guessing that's why I didn't have the option to convince the Quarians to stop being asshats this time around. Back in 2012, I remember I had successfully gotten the two to coexist, which is one of the things that made the original organics and synthetics are doomed to destroy each other ending so maddening. Other than that, I felt like I was doing most things right and getting a fairly sizable coalition assembled, so I assumed I was past whatever minimum threshold there was. Long story short, I was not. And I got the bad ending where everyone died. But I felt good. I mean, it was sad, but good sad. Going straight from Shepard and Anderson's poignant conversation to the Crucible firing, without any of the God Kid nonsense to break the flow, allowed even that ending to work. Because it hadn't tried to undo the events of the trilogy at the last minute, it still kept my immersion intact, and it left me wanting to go back and try to do better. A feeling I definitely did not have after the first time I finished the game in 2012. So, the next day, I reloaded my last save from before storming Cerberus HQ, and did a couple more planet scans to get my EMS over the 5.2k mark. And then, I fought my way back to the end again. And the good ending was even more satisfying than the previous one. Because I was using the Citadel Epilogue mod, I got to go on and have a party with my surviving crewmates. Except for Ashley, who wasn't around for some reason. But given how unpleasant she had been in the third game, I didn't really miss her or even notice she was gone, actually. At least not until I was looking at the group photo later. I did miss Tali, of course, but her absence added a nice bittersweet quality to the gathering. Anyway, despite having rolled my eyes when Joker suggested a party, I really ended up getting into it. I was surprised. I don't like parties in real life, and definitely felt some meta-social anxiety about trying to make sure everyone was having a good time. But the morning after, everyone seemed happy, and I was happy. And if you had ever told me that getting an in-universe photo of my crew posed awkwardly on a couch with bad lighting during an in-game party would matter to me, I would have said you were crazy. But it did matter to me in the end. I found myself walking by the virtual in-game TV multiple times in the final stretch of the party, looking at the photo fondly. And when Shepard walked back towards the Normandy in the final moment of the game, I felt a strong desire to play more Mass Effect. In fact, I was brimming with desire to replay the trilogy. I spent the next 10 minutes pacing excitedly around my house, thinking about all the great moments I had experienced and what decisions I would change in the next playthrough. I care about the universe and the characters again. Modding the ending into a coherent, character-based story undid the damage. So, this has got me thinking. What was it about the OG ending that made it so injurious to the series? Other RPGs have had unsatisfying endings. Planescape Torment ends with the protagonist going to hell, or wherever the Blood War is taking place. I'm not really that familiar with the D&D setting stuff. At the time, this seemed somewhat unfair since I had just worked hard to undo the misdeeds of my past incarnations. But I suppose this ending fed into the theme that all of my past selves were the same person, and therefore ending the cycle wasn't enough. I had to also atone for all the people the past incarnations had hurt. And everything else was so good that I left the game feeling amazed. There are plenty of endings to Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines where you die, but these are all obvious consequences to making stupid alliances. At the end of Fallout 3, if you wanted to do the right thing, the game forced you to commit suicide by going into an irradiated chamber, a la Star Trek II, even though you had a companion who was immune to radiation and could easily have done it for you. I think they fixed this with a later DLC, but the game still calls you a wuss for choosing a sensible option. So, why didn't any of these anticlimactic endings ruin the preceding games? For years, I thought it was just that the ending to Mass Effect 3 had been so poorly thought out. Again, see Mr. B-Tongue's videos. And in a way, I still feel that way. But in the warm fuzzy afterglow of my happy ending to Mass Effect 3, I feel like there might be something I overlooked about the originals. But first, a short digression. Earlier, I compared Mass Effect to Babylon 5, mixed with the expansiveness of Star Wars. The Babylon 5 comparison should be obvious to anyone who's watched the show, which it seems like few Mass Effect fans have. I often see Mass Effect compared to Revelation Space, or Star Trek, or Cthulhu, or Firefly, but rarely do I hear anyone mention Babylon 5, which if you haven't watched, you should. I mean, yes, it's got a dated, cheesy 90 quality to it, but it's the most Mass Effect thing I've ever seen. Or maybe Mass Effect is the most Babylon 5 thing I've ever played. I don't know. Anyway, the show is so expertly plotted and whatever, I'm getting off track. Let me explain the expansiveness of Star Wars part. I was a kid in the 90s, and that was the time when Star Wars Expanded Universe, also known as the EU, was exploding. There were new Star Wars novels coming out every few months, filled with new locations and thrilling adventures. Games like Dark Forces, Rebel Assault 2, and Shadows of the Empire had us shooting stormtroopers in new, heroic Star Wars stories. And the West End Games pen and paper role-playing game was letting players explore the galaxy far, far away as never before. This was a time when my friends and I used to spend a lot of our time drawing our own imaginary Star Wars battles and original characters. The Star Wars galaxy really felt like a place with a million stories to tell, and where all kinds of characters could and did exist across a huge variety of worlds. I wanted to play Sabacc with a Rodian in the Coruscant underworld. I wanted to dogfight with TIE fighters in my A-Wing over the black sands of Socorro. I wanted to ship goods to the corporate sector in my tramp freighter. I wanted to fight my way to the bridge of a Star Destroyer with my team of Alliance Special Forces. I wanted to look out at the Terminator of Ryloth while approaching the great cavern hangar of Kalaun. I wanted to bring my lightsaber to bear to aid the besieged city of Sinagar. I could go on for hours. The point is, Star Wars felt like a living universe with endless stories to tell. Mass Effect is the only fictional setting I've experienced with that same feeling. There are plenty of engaging settings, like the aforementioned Planescape with its bizarre multiverse, or Babylon 5 with its feuding alien civilizations, and hyper-detailed settings like Dune with its complex ecology, or Middle-earth with its deep history and languages. But these are great settings for their specific stories. None of them have that same, I can vividly imagine myself living there and having adventures feeling. At least, not for me. Only Star Wars and Mass Effect have that feeling. And I think that's why Mass Effect needed an ending that preserved the setting. It didn't have to be happy, but it couldn't end with a radical change. Everyone becoming cyborgs, or being ruled by a god emperor shepherd through his Reaper puppets, or having the mass relays get destroyed. All of those things would change the setting too dramatically. This is probably why the early Star Wars EU novels still heavily featured the Empire. The Emperor might have been dead, but the rebels still had to liberate thousands of worlds from the Imperial warlords that remained. This kept the core elements of the setting intact. Now, my half-assed research for this video has turned up that either the extended cut or the legendary edition, I'm not quite sure which, added a so-called perfect ending, where if your EMS is high enough, you can destroy only the Reapers, leaving the mass relays intact. So, would this ending have saved my immersion in the setting if it had shipped with the game? Maybe. But then again, it might not have. For one thing, if I recall correctly, it was quite hard to get super high readiness back in the day without playing the multiplayer, so many players would be unlikely to get this option. For another, even if this ending was practically attainable through the single-player campaign, it still would have fractured the setting into several vastly different states due to the existence of the other options. What is more, the whole scene with the God Kid would have still undermined the preceding story by doubling down on the reductive theme of synthetics versus organics. I said I didn't want to talk too much about the ending, but I feel like I need to elaborate a little here. While there is no shortage of things to criticize about the ending, basically every part of it could be criticized in detail, and has been. I want to briefly talk about the God Kid's assertion that organics are doomed to create synthetics that will rise up and destroy them. I assume this is a reference to the idea of singularity, but in Mass Effect, this theme makes my head hurt for two main reasons. First, we see that the main synthetics created in this cycle have done the opposite. The Geth seem to be pretty gentle, all things considered, and only act violently when either attacked first, as with the Quarians, or when serving the Reapers. And the other main synthetic we encounter, Edie, becomes a trusted crew member who risks her life to save the crew, looks to Shepard for guidance, and potentially becomes romantically involved with a human. In Mass Effect, the characters are the way we connect with the setting. And by and large, the synthetic creations of this cycle show us the opposite of what the God Kid claims. Hand-waving our experiences away in the final scene with, "Just trust me, bro, it'll happen to you too," is not good storytelling, and since it informs both the villain's core motivation and our ending options, it feels to me like a major setting breaker. Secondly, the theme of organics versus synthetics, while present from the beginning of the series, fits into the larger theme of creator versus created. We have many examples of this, such as the Solarians who uplifted the Krogans, only to face the Krogan rebellions. We have Samara and her daughter Morinth, Liara and Benezia, Miranda and her father. We have the elusive man who rebuilt Shepard, only to have Shepard oppose his plans. Similarly, there are less salient examples, such as Jack versus Cerberus, and Exogeny versus the Zoo's Hope Colony. All of these explore how destruction can arise when conflicting priorities emerge. Trying to reduce this causality to synthetics are doomed to fight organics is necessary to get the God Kid's solution of we can only save civilization by preventing the rise of synthetics. But then you're ignoring the actual cause of conflict, which, in the games, has never been DNA. Miranda talks a lot about her DNA, but it turns out not to be determinative. She, by her own admission, makes mistakes and doesn't really seem to be any more competent than the other exceptional individuals you gather to your cause. Grunt is initially treated with suspicion because of his DNA, but this is because of the cultural perspective some Krogan have on cloning, not something they do instinctively, which is why we see the prejudice quickly overcome during Grunt's loyalty mission. Moreover, we see the schism between the Geth and the Heretics, who are all instances of the same program, which ends in conflict between the two groups. The various conflicts in Mass Effect are about the friction that comes about when different parties have oppositional goals. That's why so much of the series revolves around mediating disputes between rival factions and convincing feuding groups to get along for the common good. This means that synthesis is a ludicrous solution to synthetic rebellions, since the series has established that conflict is not about race, but difference in situation. Sometimes members of the same species fight. Sometimes members of the same family fight. Sometimes this leads to the destruction of one of the parties. Everyone sharing the same DNA wouldn't eliminate conflict. We would still have uprisings against those in power. We would still see the obliteration of civilizations. Nothing in the plot shows synthetics to be more destructive than organics. And I think that brings us to the core problem with the canon endings. It's not just that they make no sense. It's that the particular way that they don't make sense damages the core fantasy of the setting. The rich characters with their conflicting, intertwining stories and perspectives bring the world to life. By invalidating my experiences with the characters, the God Kid broke my connection to the setting. When the God Kid reveals that the enemy you've been working against this whole time exists to fight a problem whose inevitability is not only not represented in the games, but which is actually shown to not be inevitable, it throws out the things that gave the setting its vitality. The only fix for this is to remove the scene. That's it. That's the only way I could see to fix that. The Reapers reap. Everyone else, well, except the Quarians this time around. Hopefully next time they'll be on board. Everyone else bands together to stop them. We all collaborate to build the Crucible. We kill the Reapers, or fail. That ending keeps the core fantasy of the setting, which is to say, it respects the setting. And by bringing back this focus of setting over plot, the game feels coherent again. Our connection has returned to the world, and that's how mods saved my connection to Mass Effect. So, thank you all for listening, and a huge thank you to all the talented modders out there who made this happen.